leave a like and subscribe.
Peer and a gangster, Yard Inquiry shouted the headlines, and the story, splashed across 3/4 of the front page of the Sunday Mirror, explained that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Joseph Simpson, had ordered a top-level investigation into the alleged homosexual relationship between a peer who was a household name and a leading thug in the London underworld, who was involved in West End protection rackets. The investigation was being conducted by Detective Chief Superintendent Frederick Gerard, who was inquiring into Mayfair parties the thug and the peer had been to, the peer's weekend visits to Brighton along with a number of prominent public men, his relationships with certain East End gangsters and a number of clergymen, and allegations of blackmail. Within 48 hours, warned the Sunday Mirror, Sir Joseph would be meeting the Home Secretary to give him details of what the Sunday Mirror was revealing to its readers. Gerard would get his marching orders, then the peer, the gangster, and the erring clergy had better watch out. With this front-page salvo in the Sunday Mirror, the so-called case of the Brighton peer began. This was the 12th of July, 1964. Things soon began to happen. Early next morning, a photographer called Bernard Black from Clapton came to the Mirror picture desk claiming to have a reel of photographs of the peer and the gangster, and that day at New Scotland Yard, Sir Joseph Simpson prepared a public statement denying the suggestion that Her Majesty's Commissioner of Police was starting a private witch hunt against titled homosexuals. It expressed pained surprise at the suggestion that he personally ordered an investigation into a relationship between a peer and a man with a criminal record. It denied that he was giving the Home Secretary details from such an investigation. It denied that such an investigation had ever taken place. Just after tea time, Bernard Black, the photographer, returned to the Mirror offices at Holborn Circus asking for his pictures back and saying that the copyright was not his to sell. The Mirror refused to return them. Next morning, Black was in the High Court applying for an injunction forbidding the Daily Mirror or the Sunday Mirror to publish his pictures under any circumstances. That Tuesday, Superintendent Gerard, the man the Mirror named as head of the officially denied investigation, asked to see the Mirror's dossier in which the allegations were made. There was no dossier. Editor Payne admitted as much, although a phalanx of reporters had been working hard since dawn trying to make good the deficiency. On Thursday, the 16th of July, the Mirror led with massive headlines on, "The Picture We Dare Not Print." It described how this picture on its files showed a well-known member of the House of Lords seated on a sofa with a gangster who leads the biggest protection racket London has ever known. Then an article appeared on the 22nd of July in the West German Stern magazine, entitled "Lord Boothby in Trouble." Unworried by the distant hazards of English libel, the magazine named Boothby and Ronnie Kray as the subjects of the Mirror story and published a picture of both twins in boxing kit alongside an early photograph of Boothby with Winston Churchill. Lord Boothby retained Arnold Goodman, Harold Wilson's personal solicitor, now Lord Goodman, and Gerald Gardner QC, who later became the Labour government's Lord Chancellor. Normally, when an individual considers himself libelled, he seeks redress at law, but Lord Boothby's new advisers suggested a more direct course. Under their supervision, he wrote a 500-word letter to the Times, which finally appeared on the 2nd of August, openly identifying himself as the subject of the Sunday Mirror's smear campaign and denying in detail all the allegations. The letter was a model of precision, describing how Lord Boothby returned from France on the 16th of July to find Parliament, Fleet Street, and other informed quarters seething with rumours that he had had a homosexual relationship with a leading thug from the London underworld, that he had been to all-male Mayfair parties with him, that he had been photographed with him on a sofa in a compromising position, that there was a homosexual relationship between Lord Boothby, East End gangsters, and a number of clergymen, and allegations of blackmail. that various people knowing about these relationships were being blackmailed, and that Scotland Yard, after watching meetings between Lord Boothby and the thug for several months, had reported on them to the Commissioner of Police. Lord Boothby went on to describe how he was once photographed, with my full consent, in my flat, which is also my office, with a gentleman who came to see me, accompanied by 2 friends, in order to ask me to take an active part in a business venture which seemed to be of interest and importance. He explained how he had turned the proposal down, said that anyone was welcome to publish any photographs taken of him, and added that although he had since learnt that the man he was photographed with had been guilty of a criminal offence, he emphatically had no knowledge of this at the time. He then refuted the Sunday Mirror allegations quite specifically. "I am not a homosexual. I have not been to a Mayfair party of any kind for more than 20 years. I have met the man alleged to be king of the underworld only 3 times, on business matters, and then by appointment in my flat, at his request, and in the company of other people. He had never been to a party at Brighton with any gangsters, still less with clergymen. No one had ever tried to blackmail him." The police denied making any report to the Home Secretary in connection with him. In short, the whole affair is a tissue of atrocious lies. The letter concluded with a challenge to the Mirror newspapers. If either of them possessed documentary or photographic evidence against Lord Boothby, let them print it and take the consequences. The letter was signed, "Your obedient servant, Boothby." This attempt to clear his name by a direct challenge in the Times was unprecedented, but was typical of Lord Boothby's bluff openness and public courage. And it produced results. Just 5 days after the letter appeared, the Daily Mirror was carrying a new headline: Lord Boothby, an unqualified apology. All imputations made against Lord Boothby in the original Sunday Mirror article were unreservedly withdrawn. The International Publishing Corporation also paid Lord Boothby £40,000 in compensation plus legal costs. Reginald Payne, the editor theoretically responsible for the attack, was not allowed responsibility for the apology. This somber right was reserved for Cecil H. King. A month later, Ronnie Kray received an unqualified Mirror Group apology. This time there was no money and no signature from Cecil H. King. Years later, I asked Lord Boothby about the case. He told me that May 1964, when Ronnie Kray came to his flat, was the first time he had ever met him, and that Ronnie had telephoned out of the blue for the appointment. Boothby states that he had no idea who Ronnie was, but Ronnie explained to him that he wanted him to act as chairman of the Inugu scheme. When Ronnie called at his flat a second time, Boothby refused because of pressure of work. It was on this second visit that Ronnie brought photographer Black, asking Lord Boothby if he would mind posing with him for some publicity photographs. Suspecting nothing, Lord Boothby cheerfully agreed. Later he wrote to me that, "The truth is that my relationship with the Krays was minimal, and the whole story is contained in my letter to the Times and Cecil King's apology. But for the Kray twins, this was by no means the end of the story. With their keen eye, the twins had spotted some of the possibilities in the incident and did their best to make the most of them. Up to the point where the Mirror settled with Lord Boothby, Ronnie had not been named directly. Just as Lord Boothby had originally been a peer who was a household name, so Ronnie had remained a leading thug in the London underworld. When Ronnie was named, it was entirely by his own decision and on his own terms. After the publication of the Boothby letter in the Times, Ronnie appeared to change his mind and personally selected the most flattering of the photographs, which were then taken to the picture desk of the Daily Express, the hottest photograph in Fleet Street, the peer and the gangster sitting on the sofa in Lord Boothby's flat. The Express paid £100 for the right to publish, and it appeared on the 6th of August on the front page beneath banner headlines. Nothing could have made it clearer that the leading thug was Ronnie Kray. Ronnie's main motive in having the picture published was undoubtedly to try to cash in on the settlement. He was considerably aggrieved when he had to content himself with an apology and nothing more, but the indirect benefits the Sunday Mirror libel brought him were considerable. The first was with the press. There had been the beginning of a press campaign on the frightening growth of lawlessness, extortion, blackmail and intimidation in London in the Sunday Mirror in the week following the libel, and for the first time the twins were being brought to the attention of the public. Once the libel case came up, all this was over. Had the Sunday Mirror pursued its investigations of the Krays' criminal affairs, it could have been legally dangerous for them, breaking the spirit of their apology to Ronnie and bearing the appearance of revenge. Not surprisingly, the editors of other papers, having no desire for legal trouble either, kept off the subject of the twins as well. For the next 3 years the Krays were to be immune to press investigation, and on the few occasions when they were mentioned they found themselves referred to as those well-known East End sporting brothers. With the police, the effects of the libel were more subtle and still more far-reaching. Though Sir Joseph Simpson had made a public denial of a police investigation into a relationship between a peer and a man with a criminal record, there emphatically had been an investigation of the Krays and their activities, protection, fraud, blackmail, wounding and intimidation. This had been in progress since the start of 1964, when Nipper Reid had been promoted Detective Chief Inspector and attached to West End Central Police Station under Chief Superintendent Gerard. From all that he had learnt, Reid had few illusions about the twins and knew that they were no ordinary gangsters. The flat at Cedar Court was under observation, their parties and unusual social connections had all been duly noted. With the people they were meeting and their backstairs influence at all levels of society, the twins were moving towards the invulnerability of the big-time organizing criminals of the States. If this continued, Reid feared that they might soon be too powerful to touch. Unsuspected by the twins, the police had a case virtually prepared when the Sunday Mirror sounded the alarm with its first article. Once this had happened, the twins were warned. More important still, because of the Commissioner's denial of the investigation, much of the earlier evidence against the twins became unusable. Largely because of this, much police work against the twins and their organization had to stop. Despite these difficulties, Superintendent Gerard and Inspector Reid still hoped for a chance to catch the twins, although since the Sunday Mirror libel, potential witnesses were warier than ever of speaking out against them. Just after Christmas, it seemed that the twins had suddenly slipped up and Gerard and Reid made ready to stake everything on one last throw. Orders had reached them from above that the Kray case was to be settled one way or the other quickly. Most of Reid's hopes rested on a man called Hugh McGowan. Son of a wealthy baronet, he was a well-known West End figure. The twins had known him at Esmeralda's barn and tried to borrow money from him for their Nigerian scheme. McGowan put his money into a club instead, the Hideaway in Soho. Soon afterwards he was in touch with Reid, claiming that the twins were asking for a half share in his profits. It was unique to find the owner of a club willing to stand up to the twins, but there was no corroboration of McGowan's story until one night in January 1965. There was an upset at the Hideaway with pictures smashed and threats before witnesses. Police were called and a man arrested. Reid sensed that here he had the basis of a charge against the twins at last, for the man who caused the trouble was their friend and drinking partner Mad Teddy Smith. Smith had given a firm impression that he had come on behalf of the twins and was demanding money for them. This, with McGowan's previous deposition, seemed enough. On the 10th of January the Kray twins were arrested and accused, with Edward Smith of demanding money with menaces from Hugh Cargill McGowan at the Hideaway Club. Bail was refused. It was a flimsy case, at best a feeble substitute for the full-scale police prosecution ruined by the earlier publicity, but there was a good chance that it would succeed. Reed knew the odds, and as the policeman closest to the twins was banking something of his reputation on it. Similarly, the twins prepared to make the case a final showdown with the law. The twins left nothing to chance. They engaged the finest criminal lawyers they could find, Kray Crowder and Paul Wrightson QC. Wrightson had impressed Reggie when he prosecuted him in the Shea protection case 4 years earlier. They also hired one of the best private detectives in London. He was to find out all he could about the prosecution witnesses, particularly McGowan. Simultaneously, messages were passing out of Brixton Jail from the twins to all the members of the firm, which was kept very busy in the next few weeks. It requires hard work and good organization to rig a trial at the Old Bailey. Before the trial, there was a battle over bail. The Old Street magistrate refused their first request, so did a judge in Chambers, but the twins did not give up. They tried Judge Griffith Jones at the Old Bailey and finally the Lord Chief Justice, offering him shorties of £18,000. He too refused, and the trial was fixed to start on the 28th of February. The twins took their application for bail right up to the House of Lords, where the former Mr. Gerald Gardner, now Lord Gardner, refused their application. There was still the trial. Juries are vulnerable, and the jury's verdict had to be unanimous. Under the jury law of those days, one juryman dissenting from a verdict was enough to force a retrial. This was important. Jurors' addresses could be found, they could be followed home, watched, carefully approached. Out of 12 men, there was a chance that one could be threatened or bribed. Once the trial started, the firm was busy. The jury failed to reach agreement on its verdict. The inevitable retrial followed. This suited both the twins. The private detective had had time to dig out more about the major witnesses for the prosecution. In Scotland, several years before, McGowan had appeared in various cases involving homosexuals and appeared with something of the character of an habitual police informer. For Paul Wrightson, this was sufficient. McGowan was discredited as a witness. The judge stopped the trial before the final speeches. The twins and Teddy Smith went free. That night, the twins held the biggest celebration party of their lives. They were supreme now. Typically, they chose the one place that would drive the message home. That very afternoon, they bought McGowan's club, renamed it El Morocco, and invited everyone they knew, including the police from West End Central. Reed went along. One of the greatest problems a policeman has to face with organizing criminals is simply knowing who is who, their clients, their dependents, their associates and friends. Such people constantly change, and a party like the twins came as a rare chance to learn about them. Reed spent more than an hour in a telephone box opposite the club watching the arrivals. Someone asked him in. It seemed a good idea to meet the twins at last, and soon Reed found himself with Ronnie Kray. Ronnie was affability itself, laughing and pouring out champagne. Reed took a glass. A camera clicked. Next day, the London papers carried pictures of the gangster and the detective toasting one another over their champagne. It looked bad for the image of the law. Scotland Yard, already sensitive about the twins, soon received a flood of letters of complaint. Nobody realized at the time, but almost all were prompted by the twins, and, like the picture at the party, they were intended purely to discredit the detective who had dared to attack them. And even here it seemed they had succeeded. There was an immediate Yard inquiry. Reed was cleared of any suggestion of improper contact with the twins. He was promoted and sent off to help Superintendent Butler on the great train robbery, and Ronnie Kray boasted that with one glass of champagne he had chased his most dangerous enemy in the police out of the West End for good. The police had been badly burnt by the Krays, and a directive was issued from the Yard that in future detectives were not to frequent the haunts of known criminals, also to exercise caution when associating with anyone with a known police record. And it was partly as a result of a report on the McGowan case that the jury law was changed. In future, verdicts would be decided by a majority of the jury. One juryman dissenting would not secure a retrial. Police, who knew the twins and understood the way their power was developing, felt that the McGowan case had rendered them invulnerable. Press, politics, police, all had been used and all defeated by the twins. They were entrenched now. Nobody wanted to risk trouble from them. 4 years of fraud and murder were to pass before the spell was broken. The two of them came arm in arm down the long steps of the Old Bailey when the McGowan case was over, and they were free again. Frances was 21 and prettier than ever. Reggie was smiling the wry grin of his boxing days when he had outfought someone in the ring. People were clustering around congratulating them, press photographers elbowing them for pictures. Ronnie was behind them. Like Reggie, he was pale after his 56 days in custody. But it was Reggie and Frances everybody had to see. Frances especially. She had found her happy ending after all. There was a hired Daimler waiting at the curb. They drove off like two top celebrities, laughing at each other. A reporter had asked their plans for the future. For years it seemed that they had talked of nothing else, but they were suddenly embarrassed. Even in Brixton jail, when she agreed to marry him if he were acquitted, everything was in the future and a long way off. Now it was happening. She was the star of the twins' acquittal, the prize the innocent man had waited for. When the big gleaming car drew up in Valence Road, there were still more congratulations, flags, neighbors, relatives and boyhood friends. Old Cannonball was beaming in his braces, wearing his best Sunday cap to welcome his boys home. Reggie was buying Frances a big engagement ring, a car, a gold pendant. There was no doubt about his love for her. She had convinced herself that she loved him. Both were sincere in the way that human beings are at moments of extreme relief. They talked a lot about their wedding. She wanted something quiet. Reggie was set on something grand. He was a public figure. His marriage could not avoid being an event. After the publicity of the Boothby case and the Old Bailey trials, he saw his wedding as a way to prove that he could still be good, respected and loved. The wedding would take place at St. James's, Bethnal Green, the red church opposite Pellich's Cafe where he and Ronnie went as boys. His old friend Father Hetherington would officiate. They went to see the old priest. He had moved to Ealing, a quieter parish than Bethnal Green. Reggie carefully explained that he had come to ask him to marry them as he had been a true friend of his family and one of the few men he respected. For half an hour they sat talking in the front room study with its books and crucifix and the red brick terrace house in Ealing. Finally, as gently as he could, the priest refused, explaining that he could not perform a marriage which he felt should not take place. He would not give his reasons, but he was adamant. If they insisted on the wedding, there were other priests. There was young Father Foster, Father Hetherington's successor at St. James's. A kindly man with spectacles, he felt no doubts about the couple's fitness to marry. On the 20th of April, 1965, he conducted the East End's wedding of the year. It had all the gusto of the Krays, the Rollses gleaming down the Bethnal Green Road, heavy with guests, the women in their big hats like some Cockney Ascot, the famous boxers in the church, Spinks, Allen, Ted Kid Lewis, the young bride pale at the altar as she became Mrs. Reginald Kray. The wedding photographer was David Bailey. His pictures are revealing. True to form, Charles Kray has managed to duck out of them, but all the other central characters are there, immaculate in Bailey's Vogue-style camera work. On one side are the Krays, Violet with hair swept back smiling regally, good-looking brother Charlie and his sleek wife Dolly. And on the other, already the eternal Cockney in-laws, are the Shays, Frank the father, Frankie the son and Elsie Shay with the dark eyes her daughter had inherited. She wears a dark velvet dress. Reggie was never to forgive her for wearing black at their wedding. Frances is the perfect bride, serene, oblivious of all except her moment. Reggie smiles nervously. Ronnie's grin is hardly the expression of a man seriously concerned with losing his identical twin to any silly woman. Business was booming for the twins now that they were reaping the rich rewards of their acquittal. As long as they were sensible, they had a clear run. The police had no wish for further trouble with the Krays. No other gang would challenge them. No one would enter a witness box against them if he could help it. Once the McGowan case was over, they were free to operate their frauds, protection, and their various rackets as never before. There was something almost weird about the way their fortunes never seemed to falter. The next step in their career began. 5 days before Reggie and Francis married, $55,000 of instantly negotiable bearer bonds were stolen in an armed raid on the Royal Bank of Canada in Montreal. In May, an even larger batch of bonds and valuable debentures vanished from a bank in Ontario. Both were sophisticated robberies. In neither case were the securities recovered, but the Canadian police and the American FBI were staying on the alert for somebody to cash them. No one did. For some time, the twins had had a working arrangement with a London-based front organization for the American Mafia over a group of Mayfair gambling clubs the Mafia controlled. Ronnie had met the top New York mafioso, Angelo Bruno, when he was staying at the London Hilton the previous year. It had been a stormy interview, with Ronnie stating the terms on which the Krays were prepared to guarantee the Americans a peaceful life in London. There was an element of bluff involved, but as usual, the twins won. Bruno appeared impressed by the twins' Chicago-style approach to crime and tended to accept them as the nearest thing to a homegrown mafia in England. This understanding was purely a local arrangement. The Mafia regarded them as one more London gang convenient to do business with. But the twins' publicity and success against the law were changing this. They were winning an international reputation. When any big-time foreign criminals were concerned with Britain, the first name they thought of was the Krays. The stolen Canadian securities were being held by a New York syndicate associated with the American Mafia. Professionals at disposing of this sort of loot, the syndicate knew they were too hot to handle in North America. As an experiment, they decided to try them on the undercover European market. Shares could be stolen in America, sold off in Europe. The syndicate had a backlog of $2 million of stolen securities waiting to be sold. Somebody suggested that the Krays might possibly be interested. It was extremely tempting. Payne and his accountant Freddie Gore were ready with advice. Both seemed quite confident that with the Krays behind them there would be no difficulty in disposing of the bonds in Europe.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there.